Alright, welcome back. What I have for you guys today is a black basing tutorial. I'm going to go in depth in different ways that you could black base your dioramas. As you can see in front of you, we have our old project from previous videos, how we carved out the bricks and also damaged them. And on top of them right here, I have three different cups. This one just has water in it, this one also has water, and this one has 70% rubbing alcohol in it. And basically, I'm going to show you guys how to use three different techniques to thin down your black paint so you could black wash your diorama pieces. So I'm going to get the diorama pieces out of the way right now. And we're going to go in depth of how we're going to use each of these liquids to kind of thin down the paint and the different results it will give you. So I'm going to bring in the cups closer and we're going to come back to that. Alright, so the first one that we have right here is just basic water. And all I'm going to do is add black paint to it. And really, the way you want to do this is the black paint first and then the water, because you don't want to use too much water because then you're going to break down the pigment in the paint, especially if you're using cheap paint. So like I said, just try to get the black paint in first and slowly add the water. So then mix this up. And all I'm using to mix this is a popsicle stick, so this way I could pull it out and then I could look at, see if the pigment isn't broken down too bad. If it is, I'll just add more black paint to it, which I am going to do right now, just a little bit more. We're going to mix that back up. And that's kind of the kind of coverage you're looking for on the popsicle stick. Let me see if I can bring that in closer without dripping. It has a solid black color to it. It doesn't look too runny. It's keeping on the stick without dripping. So that's how you know if you didn't break it down too far down. Okay, so now that we're done with that, what I recommend for black basing, just get your biggest brush. I would use a big brush, or I would use sometimes a sponge brush, especially if you have a lot of cracks like this. So you could get, if your black wash is not going in there for whatever reason, you could use a sponge brush and kind of just dab it in there. And before I move on, just remember guys, everything that I use in this video, there's going to be pictures of it at the end. So if you're wondering what I'm using and I don't mention it, it's going to be at the very end. So I'm going to show you guys, just dab your brush in there and just go ahead and apply it to your base. Like I said, I like using a sponge brush as well. And usually I like a lot of coverage. I like to make this mostly black. I don't like seeing too much pink coming through, too much of the pink foam coming through. So sometimes I would have to do 2 or 3 depending how strong I make the black wash. Right now to me it actually is looking a little too thin, so I might add some more black paint. So right now we have our first cover of black paint in there, and these little divots in here, they're not absorbing too much of the paint, so I'll come in with the sponge brush. I'm going to grab the sponge brush right now. So this is where it could come in handy. You could just dip it in your sponge and then just press down on the parts that you're having troubles with, especially the little cracks. Usually the little cracks are harder to get covered. Alright, I'm just going to add a little bit more black paint to this one, and then we're going to come back and show you how this one looks with the wash all the way in. And one thing I do say about using the water and the black paint, it does take a little bit longer than the other things I'm going to show you. So that's just one of the cons about this. The other one is the positive thing about this is it's cheap. You could buy cheap black paint. Everybody has water, so you could just mix that up and you'll have your black wash. Alright, so I'm going to cut to the next part and I'll show you guys the next step. Alright, here's a close-up of the black wash that we used with water. As you guys can see, it fell into the cracks fairly well. Also the bullet holes that we made in the previous video, and also the crevices. This has to dry. A lot of people wouldn't like it like this. They would actually add more coats and almost completely covered in black. It really depends on what kind of outcome you want at the end of it. The more black you have in there when you start dry brushing, the more broken down and decrepit it's going to look. So just remember that if you want it to look really run down, just go really black with the black wash. Add a couple layers of it. Another thing I could offer, like I said, this does take a while to dry since it is just using water, and water takes a long time to evaporate depending in what kind of humidity you are, what kind of heat you are in. So you could probably take a hairdryer to this, but don't go too close because this is foam. It will, if the heat's too intense, it will start melting and deforming your foam as well. So I'm going to cut after this, and then I'm going to bring into the next piece, and then I'm going to show you another technique I like using for the black wash that dries a little bit faster. Alright, so we're on to our next piece, and like I said, I was going to show you guys something that will dry a little bit faster, that's less time consuming for waiting for it to dry. So what I have for you right here is just a little bit of rubbing alcohol. It's 70%. And all we're going to do is add our paint to it as well. And I don't know if anybody knows this, but rubbing alcohol does dry pretty fast, so that's why this does save time. The coverage is a little bit different on this, so just keeping that in mind. I'm just gonna add some paint to this. All right, now that we have the black paint and the rubbing alcohol, I'm gonna just give it a mix. And usually with the water, when you're mixing with water, you want to do about a 50-50 mix. With the rubbing alcohol, it does break down the pigment a lot more, so you kind of want to add more to it than you would normally would. Because as you can see in there, it's already breaking down the pigment fairly well. Yeah, I might add a little bit more of the black paint in there. Alright, I just added a little bit more black paint to this. I just want to show you guys the consistency of it on the popsicle stick so you guys kind of know what you're looking for. Has a really good coverage on there. It doesn't really drip too much. So that's what we're going to use. And again, like I said, the things that you would need to apply this is a regular big brush or sponge brush. We're just going to dip our brush in there. And you want to make sure you don't use your best brush on this because you are using rubbing alcohol. You don't want to use, your finest brush out there. You might mess it up. Just be aware of that. That's one of the downsides to using rubbing alcohol, but it does dry fast. And you can kind of see how it spreads on there. Alright, I'm going to cut into a closer look at this so you guys can kind of see the consistency of it closer up and see how it goes into the cracks. Alright, here we are close up. And this is the rubbing alcohol with the black paint mixture. And I do notice with this mixture it's a little bit harder to get it in the cracks. Kind of doesn't just want to fall into there like the water does. So I do recommend using a sponge brush if you are having trouble getting it all in the cracks. So like I said, one of the downsides is it doesn't flow as easily as the water does. And the other part, it does smell like rubbing alcohol, so just keep aware if that kind of smell does give you a headache, just be aware of that. But the upside is it does dry really fast. Just gonna grab my sponge brush right now. Just give it a good coat with it. And like I mentioned with the water too before, if you want a more decrepit look to your diorama, you want to do a really good coverage of this black on the bricks. But your main goal is to get into all the nooks and crannies, especially where the bricks are divided, any damage that you put in there. Alright, this one's done. As you can see, it went into the cracks fairly well, a lot better with the sponge brush, so I do recommend that. The next one that I'm going to show you guys, it doesn't dry as fast as this one does. This one will probably dry about, it really depends on your mixture, but It gives you a good rough estimate about like 30 minutes to an hour, maybe two sometimes. Compared to the water, sometimes sometimes it could take longer. Sometimes, just depending on the weather, the water one might take you, a couple hours to put down one coat and then wait for it to dry and then put down another coat because it does go on thin depending how you mix it. So anyways, I'm going to move on to the next one and show you what that's all about and the pros and cons to that. Alright, welcome back. We're on to the next one. We got another piece in front of us. What I have in a cup this time is some more water, but I'm going to be adding something to it. I'm going to be adding this Liquitex Professional Flow Aid. This will really help the water get into all the cracks and basically just really fill in those gaps for you. You might be asking like, oh, why should I use the Flow Aid? Because it is about around $10 for the bottle that I have. Why should I use the Flow Aid over just the regular water if the water does the job perfectly fine? Well, the reason I like using the Flow Aid is not in this form. If I'm doing a really big piece, I like using a spray bottle, as you guys see here, and it really helps feed the paint and the water mixture through the nozzle. If not, you're going to get a lot of clogging in the bottle, but it really helps base a lot of big pieces in a fast amount of time, especially if you are into building dioramas for commissions. This will really help you get over that kind of time restraint. So I'm just going to add a couple drops of the Flow Aid into the water. And then you can get Flow Aid that usually, like if you look hard enough, you could find some that will dry matte. So that could be another bonus to you, or you could even get a glossy one. So when you do the black base, you'll have a matte color, so you have a matte undertone to your paints that you dry brush on top. So I'm just going to add some black paint to this mixture. And then I'm going to mix it up. Add some more black paint to this. I don't know if you guys can see that on the popsicle stick. It has pretty good coverage, but with the Flow Aid, it tends to slip off of the popsicle stick a little bit faster. So that helps get into all the cracks. It really dents it down. But the pigment's not broken up. And usually when you do add the Flow Aid, if you're not using it through the spray bottle like I would do, it does help using just the brush. Usually you don't need the sponge brush to get into the cracks because the Flow Aid really does help a lot. Alright. Add a little bit on there. I'm going to come back and zoom in so you guys can see how this one gets applied and what it looks like. Alright, here we are with the closer look. I'm going to start applying that Flow Aid / water mixture. So you guys can see it really just does sink into those cracks really well. I really do enjoy this method. Like I said, I don't have to keep buying sponge brushes to kind of get into the trouble areas. This kind of really does the job for me. And usually I'm not working in, what are we using? If I remember correctly, this is a 4x4 square. I'm usually doing bigger bases or bigger walls. So having this Flow Aid really do have to work for me and get in those cracks without me really trying. Really does save a lot of time. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you guys all of them next to each other so you guys could kind of see the coverage that they give you. I'm only doing one coat, so like I said, you can compare, see what gives you the best coverage with one coat, and which one you guys like a lot better. But this one's my ultimate favorite. The rubbing alcohol does dry a lot quicker, but like I said, it does ruin your brushes because you are using rubbing alcohol on your brushes, and it will really dry them out. So this one I do enjoy a lot. Alright, that one's done. Let's see if I can get a closer look for you guys. That's it right there, and then we're going to come back and we're going to have them all side by side and discuss one more time the pros and cons, and that would be the end of it for you guys. Alright, here we go. Alright, here we are, guys. We have the one that we used with water, the one that had the flow agent, and this is the one that had the 70% rubbing alcohol. This one did dry the fastest, but as you can see, this one kind of has a darker coat to it, and this one has it's kind of in between. This one's kind of splotchy, but overall, this does have a matte finish. So does this, but I feel like this did get in the cracks a lot better than this one did. The pros and cons to these, like I said, with this one's going to really mess up your brushes if you don't use a sponge brush or anything like that, and you do have to add extra bit of black paint to the mixture because it does break down the pigment pretty bad. This one does cost a little bit more because you're using the flow agent, which is about $10, at least around in my area. That's the only downside to that, but it does get in the tracks very well. This one is the cheapest alternative. The only thing it does take longer to dry, and sometimes you do need a sponge brush to try to get into the smaller cracks. But that's pretty much it, guys. You guys could really choose which method you guys like using, which one looks better to you guys. It's only one coat, so if you want to make it darker so you can have that dark undertone to your dry brushing, then I would suggest adding 2 more layers to this. So I hope you guys enjoyed, so don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and hit that sexy subscribe button.